2023, a year that many are facing with trepidation. And whilst much of the world will be tightening its belt, there are plenty of ways in which 2023 is set to challenge assumptions, from antique treasures and old-fashioned solutions to psychedelic revelations and the fate of the world's biggest population. Here are 5 stories that may just transform the world ahead. In 2023, the most populous country on the planet will no longer be China, but India. China's population is peaking, while India's has continued to grow. And the UN predicts that on April the 14th, 2023, India's population will overtake that of China's.
That is hugely significant in symbolic terms, but what's more important is the composition of the Indian population, specifically the size of its working age population.
India has more people of working age than any other population group. When this happens, it can lead to what's known as a demographic dividend, because of the opportunity it offers for economic growth, particularly for developing countries. Take what happened in China. A population boom under Mao was followed by the introduction of the one-child policy in 1979. This created a big working-age population, with fewer children to raise, providing the manpower for China's extraordinary economic expansion. India's demographic bulge started much later than China's in the 2010s. It's forecast to continue to around 2050, with the biggest growth in the next decade. The question is, will India be able to capitalise on this opportunity? A bigger working-age population, in theory, should mean greater productivity, but in India, there are obstacles to its success. For a start, about 90% of jobs in India are informal, which means the vast majority of workers don't have a regular salary.
Informal sector workers are quite productive. The problem is that these are very insecure jobs. And so when things like COVID happen, suddenly many of these workers are out of work. So Indian government has been trying to set up some national pension schemes, health insurance benefits and so on. But social security benefits are quite limited for many of these workers.
What's more, just 20% of women of working age are actually working. Part of the problem is that while girls are being educated to a higher level, it's often not high enough to work in offices.
So for these women in the middle of the education stream, it's quite difficult to find work. For men of the same education, there are many jobs like truck drivers, mobile phone repairers, postal delivery workers. A lot of these occupations are not really open to women.
Part of China's rapid economic growth was due to the foreign companies' factories that were set up there. The Indian government has been trying to mimic this with a Make in India campaign to entice foreign investment. It's had some success.
In a big boost to India's manufacturing sector, Apple says that it plans to make the iPhone 14 in India.
But the country's infrastructure and the state of its workforce remain a barrier.
The proportion of the labour force that has any formal training is extremely small, around 3%. There's very high levels still of malnutrition, anemia and other health issues. That means that a lot of people coming into the labour force, their cognitive and physical development may have been impaired.
The challenge for the Indian government is to create the economic environment to encourage both domestic and foreign businesses to create jobs, so that it can reap the rewards of being the most populous country on the planet. "2023 could be the year that party drugs get closer to being in your prescriptions. With 3 different psychedelic drugs in Phase 3 trials to treat mental health conditions. MDMA could even be approved to treat post-traumatic stress disorder in America.
2023 could potentially be a landmark year for us. This could be the first psychedelic-assisted therapy approved by a regulatory body.
In any given year, around 12 million Americans suffer from PTSD, and for some, like veteran John Lubecki, it can last many years. He was a participant in a Phase 2 trial run by MAPS PBC, which has been developing MDMA-assisted therapy since 2004.
What are you experiencing? Just kind of weird. Various periods of my life.
The treatment combines 3 doses of MDMA, followed by psychotherapy sessions.
It's not just the MDMA, it's not just the therapy, it's the two of them working together.
The results of our first pivotal Phase 3 study found that 67% of the people in the MDMA group no longer met the criteria for having PTSD.
If MDMA does get approved for PTSD in 2023, it will be a gain for patients who really have limited options at the moment for treating this very difficult and this terrible condition.
Psychedelics like MDMA can make therapy much more effective. They can dampen activity in the part of the brain that processes fear and release feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters, like serotonin, which help reduce anxiety and increase empathy, making it easier for a patient to reflect on a traumatic experience. Psilocybin, also known as magic mushrooms, will also be in a Phase 3 trial of a global study for treatment-resistant depression.
That also has had a successful trial so far. After having this therapy, 12 weeks later, about 1 in 5 are in remission.
A third drug, normally associated with nightclubs, is also in this critical final stage of testing. Ketamine-assisted therapy is showing promise in helping with alcohol use disorder. In the most recent study, 86% of patients were still abstaining from alcohol 6 months after treatment. Already offered at Awaken's private clinics, ketamine could eventually be regulated for general use in Britain.
We're seeing them being hyped as cure-alls for lots and lots of different mental health conditions. And while I'm really excited about their promise, I do think it's really important that patients have realistic expectations about what they can achieve. But all in all, I think what we're looking at is 2023 is going to be a really pivotal year for psychedelic medicines.
Hello, I'm Tom Standage, editor of The World Ahead. To read about the prospects for the coming year in more detail and get a head start on more of the themes and trends to watch, take out a subscription to The Economist, which includes full access to The World Ahead 2023. To get the best offer, click on the link. And now, on with the film.
In 2023, there's one country which could make a global recession much worse: Japan.
Japan's the third largest economy, and it's an important economy because its financial sector is intertwined with the financial sector of the rest of the world.
Japan is the world's biggest creditor country. It holds trillions of dollars of assets overseas, which means what happens here has the potential to affect the world's financial markets. In recent years, Japan's central bank, the Bank of Japan, has been reassuringly predictable, keeping interest rates low thanks to its very low inflation.
Interest rates only have to go up when inflation rises, and that just hasn't happened. So for a long time, Japan defied any predictions that it would have to raise interest rates or tighten monetary policy, to the extent that betting that it would have to do that was a notorious way to lose money. It was a trade called the widowmaker. It was always wrong.
Even in the face of the pandemic and the energy crisis, the Bank of Japan held fast.
The Bank of Japan, increasingly an outlier,
keeping its overnight interest rate at minus 0.1%.
The dovish tone continues.
Oh boy, does it ever.
That is until now. As interest rates have risen elsewhere in the world, Japan has found itself exposed by the widening gap.
The effect of that has been to make the Japanese currency, the yen, less attractive to international investors, because if you buy the yen and invest in the Japanese bond market, you're getting a lower interest rate, lower return than if you invest in the US Treasury market, say, where you can benefit from those higher interest rates.
As a result, the yen has fallen against the dollar, making imports more expensive for Japan, which pushed up the rate of inflation. So at the end of 2022, the Bank of Japan did something unexpected. It was all to do with the interest rate, known as the yield, on one particular form of Japanese government debt, its 10-year bond. The yield on this bond is crucial in Japan because it affects a lot of economic activity.
Often, borrowing by companies, mortgages, and all kinds of contracts are related to long-term interest rates. So the idea is by keeping those interest rates low, you stimulate spending and growth in the economy.
The Japanese central bank has certainly done that by capping the yield of its 10-year bonds at 0.25%. The yield of a long-term bond moves in the opposite direction to its price. So in order to keep the cap in place, the Bank of Japan has been buying as many bonds as necessary. But in December 2022, the Bank of Japan increased the cap to 0.5%. It might seem a relatively small move, but it was enough to destabilize the markets.
Global markets were jolted overnight after the Bank of Japan unexpectedly widened its cap on 10-year Japanese government bond yields.
And it was also an indication that in 2023, the Bank of Japan might go even further. The question is, how much further? It could ditch the cap completely, but it could also start to increase short-term interest rates too, as other central banks have done already.
What's happened in 2022 is that central banks around the world, and most importantly America's Federal Reserve, have been raising interest rates. And what that's meant is that there's been a growing gap between interest rates in Japan and in the rest of the world.
The Federal Reserve, for example, has increased interest rates from 0.25% at the start of 2022 to 4.5% at the end. But if interest rates in Japan climbed the same distance in 2023, it would be much more concerning, because Japan has the highest level of public debt of any rich country. While interest rates were low, high public debt was manageable. But if interest rates rise, investors will start to worry that Japan might not be able to service its debt and start to sell their bonds, causing bond yields to go up.
Suddenly it's going to be more expensive for companies and for individuals to borrow. If there's a dramatic repricing in rates, that can be quite destabilizing for the economy.
And because Japan is so intertwined with the rest of the world, this destabilization could spread to other financial markets, which means what the Bank of Japan chooses to do in 2023 could make any global recession much worse. In 2023, it'll be back to the future for the fashion industry, as make, do and mend will be back on trend. Big clothing brands won't just be selling new clothes, but, perhaps surprisingly, also encouraging more wear out of old items too. Tommy Hilfiger, Hugo Boss and LVMH, the world's biggest luxury group, are all set to launch their own repair and resale services. In 2023, it will all be part of a wider push towards a more eco-friendly fashion industry.
Today, we are making more clothes than ever before, but we're using them less. Pretty much the entire fashion industry operates under the same model, increasing throughput and number of seasons. Very, very limited clothing is actually designed to be remade, repaired, reused, or recycled.
Every second, the equivalent of a rubbish truck of textiles is burnt or buried in landfill. But one way to eliminate waste and pollution is through what is known as a circular economy, essentially keeping products in use for longer. Save Your Wardrobe is a new digital business that has spotted an opportunity to do just that.
It buttons up so tight that we're going to make it a crop jacket, so it's going to just above the pockets.
Growing up in Tunisia, I was really passionate about seeing how local tailors were able super fast to create new things or repair things, and coming to Europe I realized that it was all replaced by fast behaviors of purchasing. I thought, let's explore this opportunity.
Using the app, customers can transform their worn-out wardrobes.
Everything about Save Your Wardrobe started because I loved seeing things remade again and again.
Our recent research shows that things like circular business models like resale, rental, repair and remaking have the possibility to be 23% of the global fashion industry by 2030, which represents a market opportunity of $700 billion US.
But there is a risk to all this. Brands could use repair services as greenwashing without actually helping the planet.
If an organisation is offering a service like repair, but to use that service they'll give you a voucher off their traditional linear sales, this is incentivising growth of their linear business model rather than actually mainstream transition to a circular economy for that business. Any claims that organisations are making should be really specific and should have very clear definitions attached.
On May the 6th, 2023, Charles III will be crowned King of the United Kingdom. While all eyes will be on him, some may glance at his wife Camilla, and especially what she chooses to wear on her head.
It's said that he wants Queen Camilla to wear the crown that his grandmother wore at her coronation in 1937.
At the centre of that crown sits the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which was taken from India in 1849.
It was presented to Queen Victoria, but the idea that this was any real way a gift is very much in dispute. If she wears it, one expert has said that for Indians, this would be a massive diplomatic grenade.
In 2023, the Crown's colonial past will add fuel to broader debate over the repatriation of artefacts taken from other countries.
The movement in favour of restitution is becoming increasingly strong. People should be allowed to see the art of their own countries in their own countries.
Glasgow Life Museums will be the first in Britain to return artefacts to India.
All 7 objects will be going back to New Delhi, and they have a museum which is devoted to the display of confiscated or returned artefacts.
Our aspiration is to develop strong contemporary partnerships across the world. We don't think that's possible if we continue to retain objects to which we don't have legal or moral title. And so part of the process is to address some of these past mistakes and to rectify them.
The Indian artefacts aren't the only items being sent home. Glasgow is also returning Benin bronzes, part of a wider campaign to repatriate these artefacts to what is now Nigeria.
The National Commission for Museum and Monuments of Nigeria are acting on behalf of the Oba of Benin. They're trying to build a facility to house all of the returning bronzes.
Thousands of bronzes were looted from Benin City when British troops invaded in 1897. Inotie Ogbebo is an artist who is part of the campaign to repatriate them to Nigeria.
Collectively, they form the encyclopedia of our history, of our culture. So in taking them away and locking them in vaults in various museums all over the world, except in Africa, it creates that void. We can't access, as a people, the truths which our ancestors have encoded.
Other collections in Britain and around the world have also approved returning bronzes, but restitution remains a controversial subject.
The objects may be seen as just simply works of art, and therefore why is there a need to return them? But their spiritual and cultural significance is often way more important, and if one recognises that, then the return of the object becomes an obvious step to take.
There are numerous items in museums across the world that are wanted back by their country of origin. Among the most infamous are the Parthenon marbles, many of which have been on display in the British Museum for 2 centuries. A Greek newspaper has revealed the museum has been in talks about their possible return. But there are many legal barriers to restitution, often making it a political decision rather than one solely for the museum trustees. Which means it remains to be seen whether the Parthenon marbles, the Indian Koh-i-Noor diamond, or indeed any other artefacts might make their way home.
2023 is going to be a huge year for this. Expect movement on requests from Egypt, from Ethiopia, from Ghana, from the Pacific Islands, from Easter Island, from Latin America, for things to be returned. This is not going to stop here.
Thank you for watching. To read more of our coverage of what might be coming in 2023, click the link and don't forget to subscribe.